We're Brianna and Keely, and you're listening to the Where We Live podcast, where we discuss all things home.
You'll hear from us on residential real estate, the process of buying and selling a home, design trends, entrepreneurship, faith, and much more. In this episode, we are going to cover everything A to Z on the topic of appraisals. Appraisal is a term that is thrown around often in real estate transactions, but we find most buyers and sellers don't understand exactly how they work or how they will affect the process of buying or selling.
In today's market, appraisals have become more important than ever, and fully understanding how they function can be the linchpin to getting the home of your dreams. Let's get started answering all of your questions when it comes to appraisals. Well, good morning.
Good morning. What a fun topic.
Yes, and I think very timely. We're getting more questions than ever when it comes to appraisals, and I think most people theoretically maybe feel like they understand it, but when it comes to the logistics of how they work, I would say I spend more time explaining this than most things. Yep. So we thought this episode would be helpful.
Yeah, I think most people understand very, very high level.
Yes.
But you need the deep dive, which is what we're here for. Here
Absolutely.
So I guess let's start with, why does an appraisal even matter in residential real estate?
So appraisals matter when you're taking out a loan. If you're a cash buyer, you're welcome to do an appraisal if you'd like, not necessary. It is most important when you're taking out a loan, which is going to be the majority of home buyers. Really, your lender wants to know if you stop paying your mortgage on day one, this nice loan that they've decided to generously give you for a certain amount of money, they want to know if you stop paying that right away, can they resell your house and recoup their investment right away? So They want to know if they're lending you the right amount of money or if they're not.
Yep. They don't want to be overinvested. So, okay. Some more details on what exactly an appraisal is. We talked about why it matters, but let's break down what it is. And let's pretend that our listeners don't have that high level understanding even. We're going to give you all the details and help you understand. So really simply put, an appraisal is a third-party opinion of value on a property. So who, Keely, can do an appraisal?
So only appraisers, and appraisers are professionals that can officially assign value. Believe it or not, realtors are not actually officially allowed to assign value. We can pull comps, we can tell you what we think the home's worth, we can give you a range, but the official arbiters of value are appraisers. They are real estate professionals. They go through a lot of training actually and get a license just like we do as realtors to be able to do and complete these appraisals. So they're highly trained, skilled in looking at homes, but also just looking at data and analyzing, what do I think this home is worth based on today's current market, this exact moment in time.
Mm-hmm. And the appraisal is technically ordered by your lender. So third party, a lot of lenders use an AMC, which means Appraisal Management Company, so that it's an unbiased opinion. That's what we mean by third party, unrelated to the lender. And so in the transaction, it is your lender that will be officially initiating the appraisal and making that order.
And we make that distinction just because a lot of people are like, well, the appraiser works for me. I ordered the appraisal. Yeah. Not technically. And they're really not beholden to any of us. Their opinion is their opinion. And so we want to make that clear. It's an opinion of value. Different appraisers have different opinions. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But it's you're paying them for their official opinion.
Mm-hmm. And it's important to know, too, that there are a couple of different types of appraisals. We're going to touch real briefly on that in a minute. But generally, an appraiser is going to schedule a time to come to the house. They're going to measure the home to make sure that the square footage is accurate. And they'll take photos of the house. They'll assess the build quality, etc. And then a majority of the appraisal itself is done behind a desk based on data available in the MLS, which is where all of the listings are.
Yes. So, I mean, they may spend 20, 30 minutes at the house. It's not very long. Mm-hmm. And they spend a lot of hours behind the desk looking at comps. They have access to the MLS service, same that we do. And they're looking at the comps and the pictures online to determine how this home compares to others that have sold. So they're doing a very similar thing to what realtors do on the front end. When you're making an offer on a house, we're looking at what has recently sold. How do we think it compares? But they are going I don't know, 5 times as deep, because they're going to make adjustments to the price based on features that add or remove value. So does it have a nice built-in kitchen outdoors? They're going to add and allocate a certain amount of value to that. Does it have one less bathroom than the house down the street? They're going to remove value for that. So they make a lot of micro adjustments that are very refined to make sure that they needle that price right where they want it to be.
Mm-hmm. And they'll take all of those adjustments to come up with their assessed value, which again is their opinion of the home. And that right there is ultimately what we're looking for. What price does the appraiser arrive at?
Yeah, and when that price comes in at or over what you're under contract for, we barely look at the report. When it comes in under, we're really getting in the nitty gritty of how they arrived there. So we'll talk through that as well. So average timeline on an appraisal, we're here. This is September in 2021, and average timeline on an appraisal, is much longer than it used to be right now. The real estate market is really busy. Appraisers are really busy. We're seeing them take around 3 weeks to come back. They're around $500, but even more right now, depending on really the availability of appraisers and who we need to get out to the property, how quickly. If we don't need to order a rush appraisal, it can be much more expensive than that. So it can be like $700. I've even heard them going up to like $1,000. But in a situation where you don't want to delay when you get the keys to your home, this is going to be the big holdup in terms of timing right now when you're under contract. And so the appraisal is done after you're under contract on a property. A lot of times we don't want to order it or spend that money until we're done with the option period. And so, but it has to be completed before closing because they need to have it to issue your loan. So we're always threading the needle on timing with an appraisal. It's the reason a realtor may recommend, hey, if you feel really confident about this house, let's order the appraisal right away so we don't end up with a delay just because of the appraisal. So just be aware that is one of the bigger factors right now in terms of timing during the contract period.
Mm-hmm. Okay, you touched on, hey, when an appraisal comes in low, we are dissecting and reading every line of that appraisal. So let's break that down. What happens if the appraisal comes back lower than the contract price? Because there's a few different consequences from that. So why does this matter? Because the contract in the state of Texas allows for a financing contingency, which most buyers use if they're getting a loan. That means that if the lender cannot issue the loan for some reason, then the buyer can walk away and is not obligated to buy the house. And I want to note, this is as long as you're within the number of days allotted for financing approval.
So we basically want to know, right, is the house worth what you can pay for it? Can you get a loan? Most people, if they can't get a loan, they can't buy the house. So that's a deal breaker. Texas doesn't want you on the hook for that. They want you to have an out that you need in that situation. So we've got to abide by the law of the contract, the days that have been put in there, but we'll walk you through that again as your agents. A large part of the overall financing contingency, so there's kind of an umbrella when you think about the financing contingency. They're looking at both your ability to pay as a buyer, and then this house, is it actually worth what we're looking for? And so the property approval, the appraisal is a huge part of that. So if the house isn't worth the amount of the loan that the lender was going to issue you, we have a few different options, okay? Our first and favorite is that we're just going to ask the seller to lower the contract price to the appraised value. Say you're under contract for $400,000, the appraisal says it's only worth $390,000. We're just going to say, hey, do you feel like selling it to us for $390,000? In a buyer's market, a market where sellers have the disadvantage where they are taking longer to sell their home. This has been an issue. This is hard to find a buyer. That's going to be a more common occurrence, right? But we are in the exact opposite of that. We are in a seller's market. So more often than not, sellers are going to say, absolutely not. So the complete opposite solution there is that the buyer comes up with cash equal to the shortfall. So in my example of the $400K versus $390K, you're going to come up with an additional $10,000 in cash, bring it to the table. The lender just lowers that loan amount by $10,000 to equal the appraisal, and we're good to go. We move on. Things are happy. the most common solution is that we're going to negotiate to meet somewhere in the middle. So maybe they come down a little bit, you come up a little bit, and we meet in the middle to figure out the shortfall. We do have the option to go back to the appraiser. I will tell you the majority of the time it doesn't work.
Yeah, no.
So we're going to dissect the report, see if there's something that really is a big red flag that we feel like was a miss on the appraiser's part. But as your agent, if we feel nervous about the appraisal meeting value, we really need to provide comps and support for why we think it is worth what we're under contract for up front. Because doing it on the back end, especially with how busy they are right now, has just not been very successful.
Yep. And so that's a huge service that we provide to our sellers, because when we're representing you as a seller, we want to make sure that the appraisal comes in at value so that we are not finding ourselves back in the negotiation table and potentially losing a buyer. So when representing sellers, we would pull comps, like Keely said, and actually provide that directly to the appraiser when they're scheduling their appointment, to basically plead our case and say, hey, this is how we arrived at this number. These are the comps that we looked at. Oh, and by the way, we had this many offers and they were all above asking price. So the market is clearly demanding this value.
And obviously that would be very common as a listing agent to try to make sure that the appraisal meets value so that you can get the most money for your seller. It is becoming more common as a buyer's agent right now because of multiple offers. We may have had to offer a certain price to get the house. And if you as a buyer are comfortable there, we don't want this to be a hiccup very close to getting the keys and moving in. We don't want to deal with it. We want everyone to come to agreement that this is what the house is worth. And so we may support that as well on the buyer's agent side.
Mm-hmm. So if the appraisal comes in low, can we order a second appraisal? How does that work? Can we just try again?
Yeah, you can. Sure. There's a lot of pitfalls to that. I think you can probably guess some of them based on what we've discussed already. One is it's just an opinion of value. And who's to say that the new appraiser doesn't think the value is even lower and we're in even more of a hole? Mm-hmm. The bigger issue, I would say, is the seller even going to wait for a second appraisal? Mm-hmm. At that point, if you need to order another appraisal, it's going to take another 3 weeks. They could have a whole new buyer in that maybe has more cash and just move on with their lives and not have to deal with it. So you always take a risk. Obviously, it's going to be expensive to order another appraisal as well, but that ends up being the least of your worries if we may not end up being able to get the house. The seller is not obligated to move that closing date for you.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about structuring an offer and using what we just learned about appraisals to our benefit. What can we do?
So multiple offers are still common in today's market. So as a buyer, and when we're your agent as a buyer, we're trying to make sure we are as competitive on all terms to really get you into your dream home. So we beat this drum constantly, but it's not just about offer price. Offer price is extremely important, but we need to make sure that all the terms are competitive. And so there's something called an appraisal waiver that we're seeing much more commonly used in the last year than it ever was. I don't know that it was even used before. It only came out not that long ago, but it is very commonly being used, and it gives us some options and it gives the seller some assurances that appraisal all the way later in the contract period is not going to be as much of an issue.
Yeah, I will. Yes. Just to repeat that and to hammer that home, I think that the whole point of an appraisal waiver, the only point of it is to give that seller confidence. Because if I'm offering $350,000 on a $300,000 home, and Keely's also offering $350,000 on a $300,000 home. Keely included an appraisal waiver, and I did not. It's a no-brainer. Keely is giving the seller confidence up front, saying, hey, I'm going to pay $350 no matter what. Pick me, please. We're not going to go back to the negotiating table. Or if they're looking and considering my offer, there's a possibility, probably they might feel like it's a very high possibility that we're going to be back at the negotiating table. And so my offer is that much more risky.
Yes. And we always say as a seller, it's not just about the number that's on the page. It's, are they actually going to be able to pay that at the end of the day? And so let's discuss what an actual appraisal waiver is. It depends on what type of loan you're using. FHA loans technically cannot use an appraisal waiver. There's some creative things that we can do with that. We're talking mostly for our conventional buyers in terms of this waiver. The waiver itself is a one-page document. It gives you two options, either to waive that appraisal contingency entirely. So saying, hey, we're not going to have a discussion. If the appraisal comes in low, I'm covering it in cash or just figuring it out, whatever that looks like with my lender. You don't have to deal with it, seller. The second option is to waive it partially, to say, okay, I've only got X number of dollars that I could additionally put towards this loan. I'm willing to give this additional level of insurance in cash. So it really comes down to how much cash you have, how confident you are that you have a contract price that's supported by the comps. I've had, especially in this crazy market, contracts that are way over what the list price was, and things have appraised because the comps were right. And the listing agent just didn't price it correctly or had a different strategy that they priced it way low. And so looking at the comps and looking at your cash, we've got to look at both to make sure that you choose the right amount of risk for you.
The most important thing that we want you to hear in this episode and to walk away with is that we have seen sellers many, many times accept lower offers, not the highest offer, but one that is lower than the highest, simply because it has an appraisal waiver and gives them the confidence that they're not going back to the negotiating table in the case of a low appraisal.
It's why the market's so competitive right now. Cash is king at the end of the day. A lot of people that are cash heavy buyers moving from the coast here to Dallas have a little bit more to put up that way. So if you have some cash, it definitely can help you in competition. Did y'all know there was so much to know about appraisals? We really hope today's episode helped you understand more about the way appraisals play into the dynamics of the real estate transaction.
As always, if you're buying a home in Dallas or the surrounding suburbs, we are here as your realtors to guide you through this process one-on-one. If you have any additional questions, please reach out. We are happy to help. That wraps up another episode of the Where We Live podcast. We want to hear which topics interest you most for our upcoming shows.
Head on over to wherewelivepodcast.com to continue the conversation in our Facebook group, read our blog, and connect with us. Thanks for tuning in.